Okay, away. Take it away.
Yeah. So they wrote this book. They wrote this new article called "The Great Protocol Politics," which talks a lot about these things, like network proximity is now on par with physical geography. That all of us are now here, and we can not only talk to each other but also transact with each other in a digitally native medium. We can take decisions. We can be ideologically aligned on very specific topics. But essentially, we can create a country of our own, and these are just crazy ideas which look very outlandish right now, but we are already seeing like snippets of that. Like we are seeing DAOs, for example, City DAO getting land. Like they just got their first piece of physical land in the physical world, and uh, that's all being done by one single community. And a very small example of that would be Links DAO, which just raised like it raised like $1 million or more in a day to buy golf courses or country clubs for DAOs. So there are all these extremely weird experiments going on. So I obviously hopped on board when Jennifer and I were talking about it. Like we met through an interest in Indian history and culture and Asian cultures in general, and then settled on this idea. So my background is very different from Jennifer's, which makes this a great project because I come from a background in technology. I'll stop sharing and share a PowerPoint slide which goes into the things I've been to. So I'll drop a link again. I'll be just dropping links. Like that's just there's this index I have in my head which I want to share. So you can just go here and to the link that I just shared, or I'll just share it on my screen as well. So obviously, I have a very deep interest in Asian cultures and pretty much use symbols uh, like Taijitu or like Bruce Lee's symbol of how you should go about life, like take what's good, remove what's needed, and adapt what's necessary, and just being very flexible. So I had a computer science background, grew up. Grew up loving science and history and all of that, but ended up focusing just on computer science because it was the only engineering discipline with science in its name, and I wanted something that aligns with that. So I did that, and that's where I got introduced to robotics and open source software, and did my first like pieces of work in distributed systems and VR and telerobotics back in the day. So yeah, that was about like creating robots which are connected to virtual reality and which take inputs from your robot outside in a Martian dangerous habitat, and then feeding it back to your virtual reality headset. So this was back in 2015 when things were very early, but now it seems like all those things are converging. So we will have physical things in the um, we'll have cyber representations of us in the physical space in the form of telerobots. And Edward Snowden does that very often. Whenever he attends conferences, that's always on a moving robot. So that's what I started with. And later on, I found Web3 in 2016. So when I was working here, like I wanted to understand the financial side of the world or big finance after college because shiny things were very available in technology, but I had no clue about how money works. So uh, that was the best job I got after ending university, and that gave me a chance to get started with Web3. So I started to build on IPFS, fortunately, as part of one of the projects there. And if you guys haven't used IPFS, I would highly recommend that you try it out later. We will be using something very similar for DAObi later on. So we use, if you have heard of Web3.storage, this is one of the sessions you can do later on. So it's just a simple call that you make, and you can store files or whatever resource you want. onto IPFS. And I use that very often in this platform, which we just released called memes.party. This is a work done in one of the DAOs that I am in. And you can go ahead and try it out. So you can connect your wallet and connect all these things. So yeah, I'll get to DAObi, but I'm just telling you the journey which got us here in the first place and the tech stacks it took. So memes.party was this cultural piece that we released at Gitcoin DAO to honor meme lords. Like we had these cultural like centerpieces in the form of memes, which seem very benign, but they have essentially ruled most of the last year in terms of money, in terms of how communities evolved, in terms of how most financial activity and coordination activity happen online. So memes are very powerful in that regard. And in that sense, history is full of such cultural leaders who made memes, who made these stories which people believed in. And similarly, like economic policies are also similar kinds of memes. So we just created this as a fun website, but to actually honor original meme lords. So whenever you uh, create a meme, it's assigned to your ENS name, and then you can also add like a list of contributors who helped you in that. And eventually, we want to create meme trails. And the reason we want to do that is memes are permissionless by design. So if I post a meme, any one of you can do it without asking me for permission. So it's very in line with that. But this interesting thing happened when Eva, who is the person behind the Graph protocol, which is another amazing thing which you should be aware of if you're building. Like Graph is the uh, totally decentralized way of storing data in Web3, very similar to IPFS, but it uses GraphQL, which was a language designed at Facebook. So it's querying blockchain data, and you can use it for future projects to get data from different graph nodes. So you can have, uh, let's say, if you have a need for extracting data from an Ethereum node to index the blockchain and uh, index the blockchain, or let's say you want to see similar kinds of transactions on governance proposals from Tally, you can do that. And we use that at one of our DAOs to do report cards for different stewards or different workstream leaders. So we are making all these tools, and the way this is going towards is future countries or future leaders would have similar report cards, like how well did they perform on the tasks they said they would. So if we go to, for example, Chris's forum posts and his work done as a delegate, so you can go to that and see that this is how well this person performed. This is how well they participated in governance. And this is where countries and democracies and all these societies are going towards. So we see a very rudimentary version of it on Discord and other platforms, but it's all moving towards very crypto native ways of communication. And that brings us back to the power of social culture and memes. So that brings me to Eva. She posted this meme when Bitcoin and ETH were at their recent all-time high. And then Elon Musk took it up. And then Elon Musk, essentially, what he did was uh, he reposted this meme and did not credit the original creator. This is common through history. Like history is typically written by the victors, and I know that Jennifer can go deep into that. Uh, how history is erased and how blockchains are a way to avoid that cultural erasure. So we are finding ways to now incentivize people to be paid for not erasing that. So this simple meme sold for 5 ETH on Zora, which is again an interesting platform, which I'll keep dropping links to if you're doing NFT projects or something like that in the future. So you will understand the story behind this when you go to when you go to Eva's website, and there are whole articles, and she's also in her early 20s, so which is the same age group as most of us are, like 20s or 30s. And that's why I just like hanging out with all these people who are at the center of all these different technologies happening. And that's why understanding technology is one thing, and understanding other things is what I learned at Kernel, which is this fellowship. And that is where I really learned about different ways of thinking about a better web. How do we build not just Web3, but whatever will come after it, Web4, Web5. I mean, these things won't stop ever. So how do we think about trust, value, money and speech, freedom? How do we be liberally radical and design incentives and do all of that? So I went through this fellowship in the last 4 months, and this has really shown me where we have come from and where we are headed to. So this and 1729, the community, has been really helpful in shaping a lot of my thinking in where we are building all these different things. So I get to meet a lot of maximalists and people who are only on the Cosmos ecosystem or only on Ethereum or Bitcoin maxis and so on. But everyone is in their silos, and eventually they learn about different things because of the benefits on a technical point of view. And eventually it's about, honestly, culture. And that is why it's important for computer scientists or programmers to also understand like how society works. So this is one of my favorite systems diagrams from Nikki Case. And this essentially teaches us that things are interdependent. And that is what got me into thinking that I cannot just be a technologist. I have to take an active interest in culture and see how it impacts economics and policy. And now all these things are programmable. Like before crypto came along, policy wasn't programmable. Like economics and money wasn't programmable. So sending money wasn't the same as sending a WhatsApp message. You never had transaction finality in the physical world until 1 month later. So you might be using systems which give you an uh, give you a false pretense, or an assumption of finality that you sent money to a friend. But on the other side, you never know what's been going on, because it's settling at the very human pace of the way fiat systems have worked. So we are designing crypto cultures now and crypto uh, policy in the way we are coordinating people. So this is another example of a learning DAO, which we can later get into. So there is a lot of interesting things happening in all these spaces. And regarding policy, I'll just drop a link to what Michael Zargam is doing, so that you can see how algorithmic governance is going on. So we can go into all of this in future sessions very specifically, but this session I just want to use as a mind map of how I think about the crypto land and how do you navigate your way in all these different areas, which programmers typically don't get access to, because they can be very specifically focused on one of these silos. Because each of these ecosystems are awesome. Like you can spend all of your life today on building a DeFi product on Ethereum L1, not even worry about what's going on in Polygon or Solana or other things. So, so yeah, that brings us to building tech trees. So tech trees or technological trees are things which people have been building for a long time. If you have played civilization games like Civilizations by Sid Meier, you would be very familiar with the concept of a tech tree. So Foresight Institute just launched this paper, and the tree of longevity.
Yep, sorry about that.
Yeah. So no worries. So I'll just drop a link to longevitytechtree.vercel.app. So yeah, this is one of such trees, and we want to create a similar tree for society, essentially. So Yeah, Anish has a very good point. Why is it always the Civ player? So I was never a Civ player. I had no interest in understanding civilizations in that regard. But now that I understand, as I got aware about my own culture and how people are very unaware of how Asian cultures used to trade and work and learn back in the day, um, that gave me a broad perspective of not repeating very similar mistakes. And if you don't have time to delve into a lot of those historical topics, Lessons of History is a book that I can recommend. It just goes like a speed run of the best events in history and how that has changed course over the last many years. But coming back to tech trees, that is what we learned, that you need to start somewhere to reach some advanced point, and you need to do all these essential things to essentially advance and move towards more programmable mediums. So if money is programmable now, then contracts became programmable. Now contracts and money can be automated in large groups of people. That is leading us towards a coordination challenge. Like we are coordinating people, working with people, paying people, educating people, totally online. And we have the means to do that, or we have started to build the means to do that. Of course, we have very early. This is a decades long process. But if we are thinking about these things, being very early has its benefits because of how poorly these systems are designed for newcomers. As most of you might have felt, like you feel late to the space all the time, and I feel that too. So that's why it's important to attract all sorts of people and think in all these different ways, because that's what brought me to interesting projects and meeting amazing people that I have met, and that's how DAObi started. So so yeah, so we just like to call it an experiment in creating a cyber country for fun and maybe profit someday. But that's not the intent at all. Like we are very motivated by all the people that have joined the community are motivated in the historical like role playing of things. So everyone is behaving as a person from the Han Dynasty and the chancellor in the Han Dynasty, which Jen can go into. So this is just live action role playing. We are all LARPing, and we are understanding how things work by using this new programmable medium of creating shared truth. So our cryptographic shared truth, which is present in the DAObi like community, is that we are all a very specific character from history, and we get to play with our economic systems in a way we cannot in our physical reality today. So with that context, I can just hand it over to Jennifer. And now we can start with getting into DAObi and the importance of doing side projects. So always be taking up random side projects, even if they don't pan out. Yeah, let's start.
Okay. Shall I share my screen and I'll do the same
Yeah, go ahead.
PowerPoint, but I can
Go
click
ahead.
through.
But yeah, if anyone has any comments or anything to discuss right here, we can take that before diving deep into.
I think just to ensure that we are all on the same page and everybody understands what a DAO is, could you like explain to the group what a DAO is?
Oh, okay. That's another rabbit hole. So yeah, DAOs are essentially three words. I'll have to share my screen again. So something, so decentralized autonomous organizations is the current way of thinking about what DAOs are. To understand this deeper, just break it down into three different parts, like how DAOs have evolved. So there's the first word, which is decentralized. So no single person is the leader. It's decentralized. Like there's no central source of power. That is the vision. And then there's autonomous, like people who are independent. Many people confuse it with automatic or uh, like something that is programmable, and that is never what DAOs were. Like we have always, as societies, tried to create autonomous organizations in which there is independence and sovereignism. So if you ever read the book, The Sovereign Individual, you would um, like learn a lot of things about how to survive and thrive in such a world. So I'll just drop a link to that. So I would say don't color your opinion with all these books, which might seem very extreme. Just take in all the information you can and go through it. So I'm sharing this very brief information about what DAOs are with one of the leaders in the space, who is Kia from Gnosis. And you should really follow her course, and which she recently released. So DAO stands for Decentralized Autonomous Organization, and it comes from imagining um, how features of decentralized technology, such as global digital assets, censorship resistance, and automated actions, change how organizations operate. So very specifically, it can be internet native organizations, or as one of the famous people on Twitter, Cooper Trooper, he likes to call it like DAOs are a shared group with like a chat group with a shared bank account. So that is at a very fundamental level of what DAOs is. We can go into the history of DAOs. They came first in the Ethereum blockchain community in 2014, and Vitalik and all the OG people in Ethereum, they wanted to use it as a decentralized funding organization. So they ended up raising more than $150 million in 2016. And the very interesting bit about DAOs is they did not know what to name it, which is a very typical problem all of us developers have. Like that's the hardest problem of doing a lot of these things. So they just named it the DAO. It's called the DAO back in 2016. And do note that Solidity as a language was 8 months old at this point. So you can go very deep into what happened in the DAO hack. And almost all the funds were at risk. So the whole chain had to be hard forked, and that created Ethereum Classic and Ethereum. And you can go into that little historical rabbit hole. But essentially, that was the first time that you or me can participate in an organization and have voting rights and decide on different proposals in the very same way that people who are at the top of the food chain can do. And this is what DAOs currently are. And the history or timeline is extremely deep. Like you can start with DAO and DAO hacks, go into how MakerDAO, which you might be aware of with the DAI stablecoin, how that turned up to be, and then Aragon and DAO stacks work, then Moloch DAO's summoning. So Moloch is this like creature from his like history and culture that is the enemy of coordination. So if this is a coordination problem of aligning so many people together, Moloch is the god of chaos, or the person who always messes up with people's coordination problems. So that is one of the attributes associated with it. So Moloch DAO came as a counterculture organization to the whole DAO culture that was forming after the DAO hack. And then we started organizing people in very different ways. So you have Meta Cartel, DAO House, Raid Guild, and some of you are from Developer DAO, so you might be very familiar with Raid Guild, for example, in which you can just assign tasks or contracts, programming jobs to teams of people, and they essentially have raids or sprints in the boring Web2 world. So you do these very specific raids and get work done. And then you have emerging forms of shopping like Meta Factory. So Meta Factory is changing how you do physical merchandise with the help of this new crypto culture. So yeah, these things started evolving back then. NFTs were very new. So we can go into a whole timeline of those things as well. But this was the time of organizing finance in the first place. So let's start with the same figure that I showed you. So policy and governance came much later. Policy came much later. Culture has just started to develop. We created the technology for crypto first. 2009 to 2010, Bitcoin came into the picture. Then we had all these experiments in programmable money and how you can wrap digital money in different assets. So the next wave of activity was obviously people who like to get an economic or financial arbitrage out of it. You had all these applications which came through the DAO, in which it was a bug bounty essentially. So you didn't have to take permission to steal funds from anyone. You essentially had to just compromise contracts. And if you compromise the contract, the ETH comes into your account. So that's a very different way of how money works and how organizations work. If you have that kind of a power over money that is shared with a programmable identity, that's your Ethereum address, in which that address could either be one person, that address could be multiple people. For example, if you have a multi-sig wallet, so let's say 4 of us here have a wallet. So Jennifer, Akshata, and I are running an organization, and we want to create a multi-sig wallet. So multi-sigs are essentially multi-signature wallets or shared bank accounts. So for example, I'm just sharing one of my multi-sig wallets for one of the projects I'm working on. So how do you coordinate people with very similar goals and create these organizations throughout the world and issue financial transactions? So for that, you need to set up policies that in this multi-sig that I have, multi-signature wallet, it requires a confirmation of 3 out of 5 owners to go through. So this is a smart contract wallet. So when you create it, it's a very expensive call on Ethereum. And you can go into how Gnosis safes work. So this was right at the time of all these things building, because we never had a place in history when a person or a group of people or an organization or an automated script like a smart contract all have the same identity. So we are all at the same level playing field. And when you abstract away identity at that level, you can essentially have all these sorts of interesting consequences. So this is a very brief history of DAOs. You can get into like the imagined qualities of DAO, in which we see that DAOs are nothing new. They are the same as networks and gaming guilds and like organizations which are 3-letter organizations which we have organized people around, NGOs, NPOs, PBOs, etc. And today the DAO landscape is evolving at a very fast rate. So just as a show of hands and to ask you guys, what DAOs are you aware of or familiar with? Just drop them in the chat so that we can map them to one of these different categories. So yeah, you can just start writing any DAOs that you are aware of. I'll just write my favorite DAOs or things that I'm involved in, and also some that I'm really learning about. And of course, DAObi. We cannot, it's relatively young and new, but that is how all these different things start. So yeah, we can talk about common aspects in each of these DAOs. And if this seems like an outlandish thing, I think this is the first legitimate application of Web3 in which people are spending time in, they are contributing, earning, learning, and organizing. So if someone doesn't get what NFTs are because it's just magic internet pictures and magic internet money, DAOs would really make a lot of sense, because now there's extremely like enthusiastic sets of people who keep working day in and day out, but they govern huge treasuries. So you might see exceptions in the NFT world, that this is a Bored Ape which is going for this much market cap or something like that. That's only organized around communities and like pieces of art which have shared cultural value and financial value. And now they are transitioning to DAOs. But if you start looking at Uniswap as a DAO, so the whole mechanics of Uniswap works in a very similar manner. And yeah, I would love to hear about DAO experience. So please feel free to participate in the chat so that we evolve this space together. And you might see some of these DAOs. So since most of you are developers, Radical is something which you should be aware of, because Radical is decentralized code collaboration built on top of Ethereum. So peer-to-peer stack for building software together. So this just transitioned to a DAO, and it will be very interesting to go deep into these DAOs in future sessions, because each of these is a whole world in itself. So ENS, or Ethereum Name Service, which most all of you must be aware of at this point, is the domain name service system for the internet. They just turned into a DAO, and they were famous or infamous for this recent first big airdrop that happened for the people who entered late to the party. This was probably the first airdrop they got, and they are transitioning into a very similar structure. So if you went to ENS, you should be very fascinated that ENS is now back compatible with all Web2 domains. So XYZ was what they started out with, but now you can have a shared bank account on any website that you had. And we can talk about how that is so. Let's see, ENS, TLD. Yeah, so essentially you can have your Web2 identity uh, represented in Web3 through the new integration that they added after supporting XYZ. So that's why you see a lot of XYZ domains in crypto, because XYZ was the first domain that ENS supported in 2018. So everyone just started buying XYZ. And that's why most projects in crypto, like radical.xyz, or most of the websites that you see in the dashboard here, have that kind of an extension. So you can probably find some of your favorite DAOs. And now we are reaching the point where you can see how many people are joining. So members and token holders, more than $1.3 million people have joined. And that number goes up and down every week. The total value here is $1.3 billion, and organizations with over 165 members, over 100 members are 73. And if you want to go deep into what it's like to be in a development specific DAO, the most well established right now is Gitcoin DAO, because it started very early with the mission of funding public goods. And we'll get into public goods because it's relevant to DAObi. So as open source contributors, we always had this question about who pays these people who are creating more than $500 billion of value every year. So there's this famous XKCD comic about uh, software maintenance. Yeah, this one. All modern digital infrastructure is dependent on a project that some random person has been selflessly and thanklessly maintaining since a lot of years, and that is extremely true. And the same goes for Ethereum as well. So if see the same dependency chart for Ethereum, I shared that in one of my groups, and I'll share that again here. So let's see. So Kevin Owocki had this how DeFi degens are funding the next wave of open source software. So yeah, we'll go back to this figure again and again, because we created the technological medium to like organize funds. Now, how do we use that for public good? Like, how do we create the virtual or digital equivalent of parks and public spaces which anyone can use, which are non-rivalrous, that I don't have to compete with you to get there, and they're also non-excludable. Anyone can get there with for free or for a very little sum of money. So how do we create public infrastructure on top of these things? So as developers, you would be very interested in this diagram. Like all these things, like your bags, heavily rely on MetaMask. If one wallet goes down, or if one service goes down, you would see that a lot of these things that you rely on essentially drop. So you might be wondering what this little piece here is. And it can be people. Like we always say that people are layer 0. Blockchains start from layer 1 onwards. And this can be very specific sets of people who are essentially leaders in the space, whom we need right now. People like Vitalik, who have a very nice way of communicating things in their blogs across a whole range of topics. So like following people like Vitalik. I mean, these are essentially single points of uh, uh, failure almost. If we didn't have people like Satoshi, like talking in the forums back in the day, or Hal Finney and all these people who brought this space to where it is, we won't be having this call right now with this shared purpose that we want to understand more about Solidity on a Saturday. So yeah, this is where it came from, and the technological stack and infrastructure is very important. At the same time, open source software or public goods is a very anxiety-inducing thing to do if you keep doing things if you keep doing things which are run by many people. So the link that I just shared, the open source of anxiety, it's from a friend who was a maintainer, who is a maintainer at Babel, which is a JavaScript library which all of you must be knowing if you have been in Web2 for some time. And this article goes into the issues that people run into. That you do these things for free, and then there's all these people complaining in GitHub issues, and then expecting a lot out of you, and all you are focused on is helping the world. So Gitcoin started with that mission of building and funding the open web together. So you have millions in open source project funding, and it has been the largest experiment in terms of quadratic funding or democratic funding, which is the mathematically optimal way to fund public goods in a democratic community. So you can see that if the matching amount from the grant is $1,000, you can see that the funding that a particular fund gets. I'll just share this link first if I haven't. Yeah, so the number of contributors matters more than the amount funded. So let's say you have two projects. One of the projects is with a VC friend of yours who knows how to allocate capital, who is a whale in Web3 terms. So that person can either give you a large donation, or they can give a very they cannot believe in your project, so they don't want to invest. So you either get $0 or $10,000. Then there's this new model where you just propose a project on the internet, let's say a Gitcoin grant. And for example, I'll share one of the grants that I put up on the internet, and then more than 200 contributors contributed to it, and we'll get a matching amount from the funding pool. So the way you get matching amount is if 100 people contribute to your grant, even like $1 each, that contributes and counts for more than a single large contribution by a whale. So this pushes power away from the edges, and this essentially helps to fund open source work. So even if you have $1 to give to any project, you essentially end up funding it with more than $2,000 or $3,000 of value, because you get more from the matching. And that person who had the VC friend, they would only be funded by that large sum that they got. And if that's not a good project for the whole community, the community won't contribute to it. So you vote with your individual little contributions, and you can do this experiment here. So if the grant one got a funding dollar of, let's say $10, and grant two got $15, the match amount for just funding $15 is it started with, okay, let's say the whole matching amount, the total matching amount is $1,000, and you have two projects. So you just sent in $10. So the matching amount you got from the rest of the pool is $1,000. Now, as you add more grants and people, if they even pay $1, the matching amount you get from the pool is $90. If you start adding more grants and people start issuing $1 each, you see the impact it has on distribution. So even if you do an outsized distribution here, you would see that the more the number of projects and the more the number of individual contributions, you would be seeing a very fair distribution of how money can be distributed. So this has been a very successful experiment going on for 12 seasons right now. Like Gitcoin Grants is in its 13th season as of this week. And we have a lot of creators who have created all sorts of grants. And this includes all your Web2 companies, like Web2, like open source organizations like the Electronic Frontier Foundation, which which drove a lot of these principles earlier. So you can go to Gitcoin grants. This is one example. There are many such similar grants coming up. So it's very important to understand that you can create these like very fascinating sorts of programmable media, which can be focused on like creating public goods, like goods which are like clean air, infrastructure, privacy, internet access, public parks, healthcare, things which should be non-excludable and non-rivalrous. Of course, private goods and other goods have a place, like when you open a door for someone or you hold the door, that's a very private gesture, which is a private good for both of you. But then you have public goods in which you can fund infrastructure, which is usable by everyone. And if most of us are from Singapore, we know that because of the availability of public infrastructure. Like anyone can just go to a park and use these public services and use systems like wireless at SG and get access to these public infrastructures. So the secret to running any government or any community successfully is to provide these public goods. And this was the topic for Elinor Ostrom as well when she wrote about the commons, principles of managing the commons. So she came with like these 8 principles of managing the commons, and this can be directly applied to software. Mozilla just came with a practical framework for applying Ostrom's principles to data. So these things, like you need clearly defined boundaries. Otherwise, if you have like public goods and an open wall where anyone can come, you will have predators and eat up that wall. So that is very possible. So if you have a public goods funding mechanism like Gitcoin, you need things like Sybil resistance. You need to identify that people are not faking as 100 different people, and you need to have all that technology and mechanisms in place to avoid that. And we are seeing that in DAObi as well, which we will get into, that people are colluding, they are conspiring against each other with these specific outcomes. So you need to have clearly defined boundaries. Those boundaries can be set by people or by code. Then you need to have appropriate rules for the local conditions. So you can't say that a mechanism which works well in this country should also work well for that country. So Ostrom is one of those inspirational women who showed that the people who should be managing the community should be closest to that community. When you distribute power away from the point of impact, then there's a lot of information delay, and that ends up ruining this notion of creating a commons. So there's a whole bunch of these 8 principles: the right to self-governance and having nestedness and interoperability. Like, how do you have subsidiarity? And Jennifer can go into this, how Chinese governance systems had layers upon layers upon layers of each other, and each of them was automated to a certain degree based on how autonomous they were. So yeah, all these things are essentially what we are heading towards. Now you see things like interoperability in the context of Web3, in which one piece of software can talk to any other piece of software in the stack, and that's programmable. So you can essentially start to program these forms of governance in which you have all these DAOs, of course, you have all these ways of coordinating people. One of that might be an investment-focused DAO. One of them might be an education-focused DAO. One of them might be a stable coin. One of them might be about managing domain names on the Ethereum name service. So, or it could be something like Pleaser DAO, which is a cultural DAO for sharing artwork, or Gitcoin DAO, which is about funding open source software. So how do you create nested structures in which you can essentially learn a lot about all of these things? And if I want to like give an alpha leak about unreleased software, I'll just do that. We are creating a very easy to understand primer. It's unfinished, so please don't share this yet. So we haven't pushed it to production yet. So this was meant as a primer for helping people understand what DAOs are at a very basic level. So you can go to this if you want and learn how DAOs work. But we will be launching it officially in a couple of weeks once it's finalized. So these are some of the things that DAOs are about. And with that context, this is how I entered the DAO space through Moonshot Collective, which is this very fascinating group of people within the Gitcoin DAO, which is a rapid prototyping workstream. So if you have used tools like Scaffold ETH or Speedrun Ethereum, I'll drop links to all of these. So Speedrun Ethereum is something which this community would absolutely love. We can go into this in future sessions on creating simple NFTs, a decentralized staking app, token vendors, and go through all these levels. How do you create a multi-signature wallet, building a DEX and oracles? So we can go into that, and that this tool is entirely built with a person you all love, Nader, and his friends, Austin Griffith from Ethereum, from Gitcoin, and we all come from this space in Gitcoin called Moonshot Collective. It is a collection of builders and Web3 community members who are looking to prototype experiments in coordination. And this takes the form of tools like this, like tip.party, in which you can send a multi-stream payment to multiple members of your community at once with a tip party. And we can actually do that right now if you want to see how good it is. So if you have, let's do a tip party right here. I'll drop some Matic to you guys so that we see how this works. So yeah, you're seeing about these new forms of coordination. So what do we call it? I'll call it Solidity Saturday. So you can all go to app.tip.party, and now you'll be airdropped some money just for attending this talk. So this is a new way of coordinating people, right? People who show up to a call should be rewarded either with tokens or with NFTs. And imagine if we have such programmable medium early on. So yeah, just sign in to the room. We will see all of you showing up here, and I'll share the link. Sorry, I forgot to share the link. Just go to this site. Don't share it outside, and don't try to Sybil attack with multiple Ethereum addresses. So that's why your ENS name would show up, and it's very important to have an identity. Even if you're pseudonymous, it's very important to have these well verified identities, which we would later get into. So I don't think most of you are in the group yet. If any of you are stuck at any point, just let me know. Yeah, we got one person. I think that's me. Are the rest of you able to join? The secret code is Solidity Saturday.
Give us a minute. I'm still trying to join.
I mean, we started talking about DAObi, and now we are just navigating
Okay, I'm in.
across the DAO world. Yeah. So is this Akshata?
Yeah, that's me.
Do the rest of you want any free tokens? I'm here to just do a, yeah, nice. People are coming in. So,
I think
while we are doing,
I'm not sure.
just try. If you're stuck at any step, I made a guide for this as well. Let me share that. It's called Scribe How. So I made this simple guide on how to get set up. So if you don't have MetaMask or a similar wallet, you can
Oh yeah.
Okay, nice. Let's see how many people showed up. So yeah, we have people popping in. So you see this new tools of coordination. You can essentially pay people now if they are consistently meeting with you, and you can not only tip ERC20s, like you can essentially import any ERC20 token here. In the future, you can imagine this as minting people artifacts. Like if people come to your party or birthday party or whatever, you had this physical practice of giving them gifts. Now those gifts are in the digital world, and you can essentially have these tools to coordinate with other people. So this is just one of the tools that Moonshot has come out with. The next thing we are trying to do is quadratic diplomacy tools, or how do you distribute tokens among your team members. So if you have worked in Web2 organizations, you had this whole concept of the end of year appraisal, where people where you have to really focus on getting the right amount of recommendations from very specific people, and that ends up deciding your bonus and other compensation structures. So now you can decentralize that. So instead of pleasing a certain set of people who decide your fate in that company, now you can get yourself attested by a whole bunch of people on the call that I really like what Akshata was doing in the last sprint or in the last class. So I can just start this and select the team members I have worked with and assign them that this person needs to get 10 votes instead of 5 votes. And then you have quadratic funding after that step to essentially allocate funds in that election. So now elections are programmable. So you can already see that we are heading towards some sort of a network state, and these tools would be used to that end. And we have, I think, six people in the tip.party room. So I'll keep this room open and distribute the funds later on. If any one of you are facing problems, just shout out so that we can solve it early on. I want to distribute it as soon as possible so that you see the confetti that comes on the screen afterwards. And from a developer's point of view, you can go to scaffold.eth. If I close the tip party room, let me see. Yeah, it still exists. So scaffold.eth is this whole stack that you can use to essentially adapt any Solidity app with any front-end app in your contract. So you can go to different branches of scaffold.eth. If you want to work with a bonding curve or build like a DEX or a multisig starter kit, you can essentially do that now with scaffold.eth. And we can go into this. And I think Nader and Austin had a video on this. Let's drop a link to that as well, because you guys can follow along with what they were talking about. Yeah, this was a live event by Didi, and you can follow that later on. And yeah, at the same time, I think this is a good time to understand that this was what DAOs were. This is where we have come from. There are all these schools popping up in crypto. There are all these new forms of NFTs like charged.fi, in which if you have seen ERC 998, you can now you can have NFTs which can compose of any other form of. So yeah, you're igniting more possibilities. And the thing which all of us should be aware of as developers is reading the EIPs. Always remember to read your EIPs at the protocol level and also propose your own EIPs. Like EIPs are these Ethereum improvement proposals, and you guys might be familiar with ERC 721. And all of it started as a contribution from one of us on GitHub, which was debated on GitHub in the form of issues. And that is how it became a standard interface for non-fungible tokens or representing deeds on a blockchain. So it creates a standard API for NFTs. And this is where people understood back in the day, created in 2018. And now you know where they are used in almost every random thing, even in things which are undesirable. So yeah, you can represent any deed or action on the blockchain, and people just get their heads stuck in that NFTs are just about property or digital scarcity or digital assets. They are a programmable medium in which you can represent any token or responsibility or any programmable action. And you are seeing that moving forward. So you can have very fascinating use cases. So if you go to alpha.guild.xyz, I'll drop a link to that. You can have these very specific use cases. So if you create a guild, you can create very specific conditions that if someone holds an NFT or someone holds this, or they have attended an event which they got a POAP, we can essentially have these very specific conditions, which creates a group by default. So if you have been doing certain kinds of things, you should be a part of a community which you have like signified or signaled with the help of the ownership or holding some tokens in the community. So if you are familiar with POAPs, like I assume all of you are, if not, we'll go through Vitalik's wallet, because that's the first wallet which everyone uses whenever doing any experiment on the blockchain. So if you want to stress test any application, if you're reading from the blockchain, test it with Vitalik's wallet. It will always end up crashing your applications because everyone ends up sending him doc tokens and random transactions, which are a very nice test for all of these things. So POAPs are these NFTs, or proof of attendance protocol NFTs, and we can do a POAP for Solidity Saturday in a future session, so that all of you who showed up can be rewarded with this token for free. It lives on the XDAI main network, and you can transfer it to Ethereum. And it essentially is about representing attendance in the blockchain. And I have used this for events in my own physical world in the jobs that I'm a part of. And this helps to solve a lot of problems. So 1729, for example, uses these POAPs for representing attendance in the class. And these different communities can then connect with bots like Collabland, which there's an API which you can connect with Discord. Yeah, you can serve tokenized communities and connect a Collabland bot on Discord, and people who have a specific NFT can get access to all these different things. So you can go to these two links, and I think we can have a Collabland bot on Solidity Saturday going forward, our own little DD in which only people with a specific NFT can have access to it, and it's issued for free. So we are creating it as a public good and not locking people out of the system. So this is proof of attendance, and we'll do something very similar for DAObi as well. So this is one way of organizing people. Now let's see, do the rest of you who haven't joined in, like if anyone is facing issues, just unmute yourself and let me know so that I can start issuing the payments. Yeah, I mean, yeah, okay. That nudge was what someone needed to join in. Cool. So if anyone is still left out, let me know, and I'll just like wrap this up very soon. So with all that context that we have been building all these tools, let's go into the topic we came here for and where Jennifer's experience would really shine. I'll stop sharing right here and come back to screen share after we have covered DAO.
Okay, can you see my screen okay?
Yeah.
Okay, great. So yeah, as Sid mentioned, this is essentially a social game that uses cryptocurrency as a way of keeping score. So in theory, if you win the game, you also make a bit of money off it. Hopefully that will be enough money to incentivize people to carry on playing, but not so much that we attract too many speculators too early on and crash the game, because the principal goal is to play this game rather than to, get bored ape rich. So why DAObi? DAObi is actually the name of a currency that was used in China during the Han Dynasty. And the activities surrounding this currency make for a really nice game environment, because at the time, various different groups within the Chinese Empire were fighting for control over this currency, with the emperor as the ultimate arbiter. And that is something that can be replicated quite accurately and quite nicely in a blockchain environment where the chain essentially plays the role of the emperor making the final decisions. So fundamentally, it is a Han Dynasty LARP, but I would like to start off by sort of saying why you should be interested in this, even if you're not interested in historical role playing. And the first reason is because I'm not interested in historical role playing either. I did not come to this through, being a weeb or anything. When I actually started my translation website, I knew next to nothing about ancient Chinese culture. The cultural side, I had no idea. The clothes, the food, music, and so on. I came to it because I was very interested in non-reciprocal systems. And these are related to other sort of similar ideas, which would be things like emergence, non-linearity, dynamic equilibria, and so it is a non-reciprocal system. Basically, it's a system that doesn't follow Newton's third law. So for every action, there isn't an equal and opposite reaction. There's something else. And these do occur in, you find them occasionally in particle physics and so on. But where they occur a great deal is in nature. So the example I've got here is a very well-known one, which is the relationship between the deer and the wolf population within a given environment or a given ecosystem. So you can see the graph on the left-hand side here. That is probably something that if you've been to a high school science class, you will recognize. And it's clear from the graph that the deer and the wolf population, in this case, they're controlling one another. There's this mutual interrelationship. However, if you see a pack of wolves chase down and eat a deer, that doesn't mean that the next day you're going to see a pack of deer chase down and eat a wolf. It's a non-reciprocal system. In fact, it's the number of deer grows, which feeds a greater wolf population. The number of wolves grows, they eat more deer, and the deer population drops. So this is a stable dynamic equilibrium, but it's not reciprocal. And the best writings that you're going to find on these actually come from ancient China, and that is why I got into ancient China, and I learned the language, and I actually ended up doing my thesis on it. So yeah, China about 2500 BC, people really started getting interested in this, and they got interested in a scientific way. And this was because a lot of the people who were writing at the time, so that would be the people who were the magicians and the fortune tellers and so on, their jobs depended on their ability to make accurate predictions. And to make accurate predictions, it's better, rather than relying on actual, I Ching divination or turtle shell divination or whatever method you're going to use, you're better off scientific or statistical rules. So if you know about, for example, reversion to the mean, if you understand how reversion to the mean works, you're going to give far better predictions to your king about future events than if you don't know about it, even if you use the pretext of an I Ching divination to do so. So these guys started writing about how to do this, but obviously because it was related to their job security and the inside baseball surrounding their jobs, they couldn't necessarily do so in a very clear and scientific mathematical way like on the left. So they had to do it in a somewhat more oblique manner originally. So you get things like the Dao De Jing and the Zhuangzi, where they're providing these scientific analysis of statistical natural phenomena, but they do it in this rather cryptic way, so you can't always tell. I mean, on my Substack, for example, I've got an article where I sort of totally deconstructed one chapter of the Zhuangzi to show that every single story in this chapter is about non-linearities. It's basically an introduction to statistics with a focus on these sort of pretty advanced calculations, which are all told in the form of stories. So you wouldn't necessarily recognize that they are mathematical calculations, because they don't fit how a modern Western person would interpret such calculations. But the conversion is possible. So you can see here I've compared the standard deer wolf population graph with the phase plots, which is another way of expressing the same phenomenon, with the Taiji Chuan, which is another way of expressing the exact same phenomenon. Just because one has numbers on the side, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's more scientific or better, or it doesn't mean that it's worse either. But yeah, I mean, I would actually say that the Taiji Chuan, the yin yang diagram, it's probably more effective for communicating this idea to lay people. So if you went off into the middle of the wilderness and found, you know, a yak herder and you showed him the Taiji Chuan, he would probably realize from that what you were getting at, which he wouldn't necessarily from the graph. But on the other hand, having the numbers does allow us to be a lot more precise over it. So
can we pause here? Like for this audience, like I've dropped a link in the next slide, which you can show on your screen. So just open that link. And are you able to open it? So that's again a tool by Nikki Case. Or I can drop. Yeah, perfect. So this is the rabbits and foxes. Like just hit play. And you can design these complex systems, and you can just play with, if you increase the rabbit population by clicking the up arrow, you see this effect on the foxes population. And then that has a negative impact on the rabbit population. And you can increase the speed of this to see how these things turn out by the bar below. So if you increase this, and then if you increase the rabbit population artificially, like by just clicking more up arrows, more down arrows, you will see how these things have an impact. So if someone is interested in visualizing it in this manner, they can reach to the same conclusion of having the Taiji2 symbol. So yeah, that's why it's important to marry these mathematical minds with the cultural symbols that we have, because that's in a few layers of abstraction, which is removed from hard, cold logic and math. Yeah, I mean, that's the only thing.
Okay, great, thanks. Yeah, that's actually a really nice one. I didn't know about that, but yeah, it's better than my static one. So yeah, basically the idea is that both the Taiji2 and the mathematical have different advantages, but they are expressing the same fundamental thing. So from this idea of using an ability to analyze natural phenomena to extract advantages from them, it didn't take long for the ancient Chinese writers to realize that you could also reverse engineer these systems, and you could do so in a way to establish specific forms of social control. So you could use incentives, which are essentially rewards and punishments, to move people in a particular direction, to increase their willingness to fight for the country, or to increase their willingness to farm, or to prevent them from breaking the law. And you could set up these incentives in such a way that society would eventually maintain itself. So there's one really nice example in the Shangzhenshu of a self-reinforcing cycle. And this is the law that was used, is probably from the Li Kui. It's probably an earlier law, but the first example we have of it is written in the Shangzhenshu, which says that if any civil servant is found to be conspiring against the state, then if one of his subordinates reports him, then the subordinate will inherit all of his property and titles. So that effectively makes it really difficult to conspire against the state, because if you're going to have a conspiracy, you're going to bribe your underlings to take part in that conspiracy. But this law means that there is effectively no way to offer them more than they will get for denouncing the conspiracy. So it makes it close to impossible to conspire against the state while also not costing the state any money at all. So it's one of these really nice little circular systems that just maintains itself and doesn't need any conscious decision making to keep it going. So yeah, this is something that obviously we do know about in Europe now, you know, but we didn't really catch up with China until, I would say, the late Renaissance and the early Enlightenment on this. The first really nice, clear descriptions of these phenomena actually come from Discourses on Livy by Machiavelli. So in that, he starts to describe dialectic systems within a political context. So he gives the example of ancient Rome, where you would have the aristocracy who would try to oppress the commoners, and then the commoners would get enraged and they'd have a riot and revolt. And both of those things, you know, neither of them is a good thing in and of itself, but together they produced the dynamic equilibrium that maintained Rome's stability and allowed it to grow and become this empire. So until that, you really just had this sort of very naive and incorrect interpretation of how politics works, which is sort of the thing that you get in the Greek philosophers, where you say, oh, if you're a good person, then you'll be a good leader, which is, you know, clearly and provably false. So yeah, the theory in Europe really started to catch up in the Renaissance, and then in the Enlightenment, with the development of liberal economics and so on, which led into modern economic theory, which obviously is sort of very graph-based and similar to this. So our game, or DAO, or currency, whatever you want to call it, is based off one very simple rule, which is the idea that every day participants get to vote on who they want to be the chancellor. And the chancellor only has one power, but it's a very important one, which is to set the token generation rate for the next day or the next however long he's in power. And that means that he effectively controls the inflation rate. And that is the only rule in the system. So currently it's on the Discord, which I've sort of got here. There's a daily vote, just because it's easier to program. And that is not necessarily super reflective of how things actually worked in the Han Dynasty. So that is going to be fixed, hopefully, when we move to the testnet, with a rolling count of partisans. So your vote will roll over from one day to the next until you decide to change it. But yeah, that is, you know, 100% of how the system works. There's nothing else in there. If you want to become a chancellor, if you want to have absolute power and set the mining rates, you have to use analog means to do that. So you have to use bribery, persuasion, or threats to convince enough people in the rest of the network to support you. And that is where the game gets interesting. So we've had a lot of people sort of coming into the Discord and saying, you know, can we have this rule? Can we have that rule? And I've been polite about it, but systematically I've said, no, I'm making this one rule. And then if you guys want to make rules, then you go ahead and do it. But I am not going to intervene, because I want to see what rules this single generating rule generates. So this is just an example of a sort of question and answer that we had on the Discord recently. You know, you get people saying, if I'm chancellor, can I behead people? And my answer is always, yeah, you can, if you go to their house and physically behead them with a sword. You know, can I rob the bank? Can I steal the treasury? Yeah, you absolutely can. If you hack us or you hack the exchanges, if you have the skills to do that, then go ahead. You know, can I start my own rival currency? Yes, you can. You can fork the chain. Can I found a cartel to take control over the currency? Yes, you can. You can start a DAO on the side to organize your activities, and that is illegal. Because yeah, the goal is to make this as close as possible to a real society and just see what happens. And that was inspired by sort of previous experiments that I've been doing, which is a sort of agent-based modeling of European and Chinese political systems. So I hate the top bar always stops me from switching to. So yeah, we're sort of working through the rules at the moment, and after a while, people start to get the rules, and they get the theory behind it as well. So the theory behind it is that this particular setup with voting for the chancellor who gets to set the mining rates forces people to find a compromise among themselves. So if you're a DAObi whale, if you're one of the initial investors, you're going to have a lot of DAObi. But if you want a chance to get any value out of them, you have to sell them. And by selling them, you bring in minnows, you bring in much smaller players. And the smaller players do not necessarily have the same interests as you do. So if you own a lot of these tokens, you're going to want to keep the value high by minting very few or mining very few. On the other hand, if you're a newcomer and you're interested in the currency, you want more, then you're going to want to increase the mining rate. So that way you've got this constant conflict that, like a gyroscope, or like the constant conflict described by Machiavelli or the Warring States era authors, should, in theory, maintain a long-run dynamic equilibrium. So if you're a whale, you can persuade the newcomers to vote for you. You can mint coins to do that, but that will devalue your holdings. You can bribe them, but again, that will devalue your holdings. They will try and push you to mint more. You will want to mint less, and eventually, hopefully, an equilibrium will emerge. And that is something that, even though we're only, we're only running a demo on Discord, which is very, it's not hugely sophisticated. The tokens aren't actually worth anything, just to avoid me getting in trouble with the securities people. It's only a simulation at this stage, but we've already got people beginning to reenact the phenomena that we saw during the Han Dynasty. So you've got people talking about forking the chain, which is something that absolutely happened under Emperor Wen of Han. People, the aristocracy, started creating their own currencies and competing among themselves. You've got people trying to set up factions to make value of their holdings, which again, absolutely something that happened under the Han Dynasty. You can see just at the bottom here, anyone interested in factioning, I want to stay in power, and that means developing a mining policy beyond simple division. So yeah, it's starting to work, and I'm really excited for us to move to the chain and see if we can keep this going. So yeah, you can just see I've sort of summarized this here. So the primary goal is not to create currency, though the tokens will need to accumulate enough value to incentivize serious participation, but to function as a social experiment. Essentially, it's like these agent-based models that I created previously, except rather than using simulated agents, we're using actual humans, which is slightly unethical, but thankfully I'm not doing this in the context of a university, so I don't need to worry. So the participants are subject to multiple pressures. Holders of large quantities of DAObi can only extract the value by selling their holdings. That brings in smaller players who can then outvote them and increase the token generation rate, which devalues the whale's holdings. So they've got to somehow among themselves work out a compromise that will keep everyone as happy as possible. And to do that, the players obviously have to find a way to navigate the environment. So they can use political means, which would be forming alliances, or economic means, which would bribe, or eventually, totally illegal means like hacking the exchanges or hacking the site, which, yeah, if people do that, I am really happy to see it, because it shows that, the simulation is bleeding into the real world. In terms of culture, I would say it's sort of I've got a mixture of interests on the Discord, and for me that is a great thing. We've got sort of history people, we've got LARPers, we've got role-playing game guys, we've got economics professors who are just interested in sort of the data that comes out of it, crypto guys who are interested in the cash itself, and so on. And I'm really sort of happy that we're bringing together people from these multiple streams, because if we just had one, it would not end up being a realistic simulation. People, if we just have the LARPers, then the crypto side will suffer. If we just have the crypto side, people, the LARP will suffer, and so on. And yeah, I would say that the overarching goal of this is something that is related to this quote that I've got from the Screwtape Letters by C.S. Lewis. This idea that there's a tendency to dismiss the modern utility of historical texts. So as I mentioned, I used these very ancient texts as a part of my thesis to show that the same assumptions about political legitimacy function in China now as did 2,500 years ago. And I encountered an incredible amount of resistance doing that. I mean, I don't want to bitch, but yeah. because there is this idea in the modern academy that ancient texts are, you know, mystical woo, and they've all been surpassed, and now we have better things. Now we read nudge and thinking fast and slow, so we don't need the classics. Whereas I'm saying, look, these ancient texts, they are written in a way that seems obscure to us. It wouldn't have done to the original readers, but yeah. But that doesn't mean that they are non-scientific. So I could create this basically by translating passages from the Guanzi into Python. And I didn't add anything myself, I just translated them. And this is what you get out of it, which is a fully functional online simulation that you can run through 1 million times and get consistent results. So if I can do this, probably it's worth taking another look at these texts to see what we can extract from them that hasn't yet been done. However, standing on our way is what C.S. Lewis calls the historical point of view. So the historical point of view, put briefly, means that when a learned man is presented with any statement in an ancient author, one question he never asks is whether it is true. He asks who influenced the ancient writer and how far the statement is consistent with what he said in other books, and what phase the writer's development or in the general history of thought it illustrates, and how it affected later writers, and how often it has been misunderstood, especially by the learned man's own colleagues, and what the general course of criticism on it has been in the last 10 years, and what is, quote unquote, the present state of the question. To regard the ancient writer as a possible source of knowledge, to anticipate that what he said could possibly modify your own thoughts or behavior, this would be rejected as unutterably simple-minded. So the goal with this, I think, is to prove this wrong, to show that we can build a country, build an economy using Han Dynasty maps and show its functionality. And this was directly inspired by an argument that I had on Twitter sort of a few weeks ago, when I was sort of genuinely surprised to read that there are, you know, China experts out there who believe that these ancient political economy texts are just total woo. They're not, you know, they're non-functional. They're just, you know, a bunch of guys spouting their opinions. And yeah, I was shocked by that. I was saying, look, I can make a procedural model that works and will produce the same consistent structures. That shows that these guys knew what they were talking about. And I had no idea that other people just believe these texts to be totally non-functional. So this is now my new crusade. I had the idea for the DAObi sort of game before that, but it was really this argument on Twitter about whether or not the ancient authors knew what they were talking about that sort of pushed me to approach Sid and see what we could do with it. So yeah, that's pretty much my bit finished. I guess that explains the technological background to it, and yeah, the development of these sort of new blockchain technologies and DAOs and different ways for doing this really allows me to move from these procedural models, which I just program myself or with help because I'm the world's crappiest programmer, to a real world version. So we can start experimenting with these concepts in vivo using real people. We create a country and then play around with it, which is something that would not have been possible, you know, until very recently. And now it is, and it seems like no universities or anything are doing it. So yeah, let's give it a go ourselves and see what happens.
This is pretty fascinating, to be honest. You're basically taking something that exists historically and then applying a modern tech to it to see what happens, right?
Yeah. So like I say, in the past, the emperor would have had the final say, and he would have, 99 times out of 100, he would have given power to whoever had most followers. We set up an emperor with actual legal powers, but what we can do is set up a blockchain which has the equivalent, and that gives us the power to create our own country online, essentially.
That's quite a transition. I think evolutionarily, it's a transition in human history. Um, I'm curious. Did you think about making this a DAO, or like how did you come about making it into a DAO?
So I can sort of give the lay explanation, and then Sid can give the technical one. So I was sort of really I was really into blockchain and stuff in the very early years. So, you know, the Papa John's era. And I pretty much just said, oh, wow, the math behind this it's a really elegant solution. I really like it. And mined absolutely no Bitcoin and didn't get rich. However, I did mention to a couple of guys who now think I'm this genius investor for predicting how this would go. But yeah, I was interested in it. And then when I started working on this, I did kind of realize that we could set up a cryptocurrency for doing this. But I knew nothing at all about, you know, setting up DAOs. I didn't even know there was such a thing as a test net. So that was a revelation to me. I had no idea what the law surrounding it was, or anything like that. And my original idea was just, yeah, we'll fork a chain and call it DAObi, and then distribute it, and that's how it will work. And Sid came in and just made that basic idea into something that would be functional, which I'll sort of hand over to him and let rip now.
There's a question from Anish. For
Oh,
you.
okay. I don't have the chat visible. 1 second.
Okay, I'll read out.
Oh yeah, no, I've got it. Oh, do you want to read and then I'll answer?
No, go ahead.
Okay, so if anyone can't see, it's what's your end game with your interest in non-reciprocal models, whether derived from Taoist legalist texts or more contemporary sources? What do you hope they'll enable today? I hope this is an off-topic. No, not at all. I mean, my initial interest is I just like them. They're just really satisfying to watch. It's yeah, it's like watching a lava lamp or something. It's really nice to see. But yeah, I am sort of interested in this idea of decentralized states and you know, on-chain states and things like that. I mean, I was sort of any wacky libertarian experiment over the past like 20 years, I've probably been, you know, at least on the sides of seasteading and all the other sort of stuff that has come and gone. But yeah, mainly I'm just there for the elegance of the models. It's really nice to watch them, and I'm interested to see what else we can do with them. So even if DAObi, you know, if it collapses or if it gets taken over by speculators, if it gets 51% hacked, whatever, that is still data, and I want to see what the data is. And when we've got the data, then hopefully that will be used to build better DAOs in future.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, and the simple answer for why create a DAO is why not? Like everyone is creating it today, and everyone has their own Telegram groups and WhatsApp groups, and they're forms of coordination with people all over. And the next wave is to just have a shared purpose and maybe create these shared cultural products or technological products or financial products or whatever, and do that. So that's why we began to create it. And to answer your question, Anish, more specifically, like you can implement non-reciprocal models today, and people are already doing that. So I'll start doing my own thing of sharing the screen. So if you go to sim.commonsstack.org, they have a whole simulator which you guys can try about setting up the token rate. So let's say how many people or hatchers we want to initiate. So this is done with a tool called CAD, which for the mathematical people here is a way to design, simulate, and operate within complex systems. And all the tokenomic things that happen today, like how do you design an economy and simulate the effects of that economy, happen via CAD. They have like interactive Python notebooks that you can go through. And this essentially helps you simulate a lot of these things. So we can have a whole session on CAD as well. Like this space is just overwhelming at this moment. So you need experts from all these fields to talk about things, and very easy to understand tools like the one I'm using right now. So after you have engaged the crowd and you have proposals on the table, how will they be funded? So let's say Solidity Saturday is focused on 5 specific topics. Instead of thinking about money, we can think about which talk we should have next. So we can do a simple poll. We can have more complicated mechanisms if people have different interests. So similarly, here you have a decision. How much of the money should go to the funding pool? How much should go to the reserve, so that if you have a bear market later on, or if you have a bear market of ideas later on, what should you be focused on? So these concepts are very naturally aligned in that sense, and you can create these parameters and essentially configure this voting simulator. So like Common Stack likes to call this conviction voting, which is a new form of voting in which your votes are represented not only when you vote, put in your votes, but also over time. So the more time you have your vote put in, that counts for a more powerful voice. And that helps to amplify the voices of the minorities, which they may not have. In cases of coin-based voting, you can have whales just coming in and showing their dominance in any snapshot, in any proposal. So you might be seeing this in all the popular DAO proposals that you can see on Snapshot today. So for example, this is one of the work streams which I am in. We had a budget request that we need a certain number of tokens and break it down. And then you can see that we have all these whales with more than 969,000 GTC. One GTC has a lot of economic value. So coin-based voting will never favor like individual contributors with like lesser number of GTC. And you can see all this DAO stuff happening by going to Snapshot, and it's an interesting tool. Like it's an off-chain voting mechanism, which later on is converted to on-chain proposals. So you can see how all these DAOs are coordinating and deciding on different kinds of things. So one thing that you might be very interested in, which I'm going to start working on next, is we have a partnership with Developer DAO. So most of you will be working very closely with Gitcoin DAO. And Nader was the person who raised this proposal. And you can see the discussion that happens for this on the governance forum. Let's see that. So the discussion or the communication for all of this happens on the governance forums for all of these DAOs. And then you can have simulations of all these different things. So let's see, partnership and mutual grant with Developer DAO. So yeah, Nader just wrote this proposal down. So this is like working with the government. You passed a proposal, anyone can pass it. Now it's more accessible. And then if people like it, like people can just say, I like the energy at Developer DAO. It has an amazing origin story. This is just words. So what crypto allows you to do is money becomes speech in crypto. Like you put your money where your mouth is, and you show your conviction with the help of coin-based votes. So that is the first layer of abstraction that we have built using crypto technology. The next level is, how do we do conviction voting? How do you represent conviction in an idea, even if you don't have the tokens? Because if you have the tokens, then any whale can come in, take all your tokens, and then just have it their own way. And that would be an attack on the design of the system. So how do we prevent things like that from happening? So yeah, we think a lot about that at the Common Stack, because it's about allocating public funds and things like that. So this goes into things like the give economy, which is an economy based around the nature of giving. And they have built like DeFi on top of giving. So you can go there. And these experiments are very helpful for us to understand where this world is heading towards. And we need programmers like all of you and designers and all sorts of people who can build these systems. And a DAO is not very different from a company. So if you follow our channel, um, let me see if I can. 1KX network on. Yeah, so she has a very wonderful way of illustrating these things of what a DAO is. And let's see if we can see the media. So a DAO, I mean, it's opening up all these possibilities which we have seen through traditional cultures, which we can replicate because we are at the same level of tribalism as we were many years back when we were physically constrained. So we can replicate all of that in the way that we want, and then also design new forms of um, coordinating. So I'm unable to find the exact picture. I'll load it from my Telegram chat. Yeah, it should be in my piece. And yeah, you can reimagine the future of education, for example. What does a school look like when you can be incentivized to learn for the sake of learning and not how learn to earn models are today? How do you reimagine those things where teachers are incentivized to teach and not fall into the prey of designing like inspiring content on YouTube, which is shallow, but they have to do it for the YouTube algorithm anyway. So what do systems look like where you can teach, where you can learn whatever you want to learn, and you can work eventually in one of these DAOs, which can sponsor these kinds of learning programs. And such kinds of experiments have already started. So for example, I'm also like a part of this thing called Zero Knowledge University, which is extremely mathematical and goes into the deep technical roots of how to build ZK systems. And this is an example of a university going on today, which pays you to submit assignments. So I know that that's a very bad kind of an incentive when it comes in the way of your learning. And most people there eventually end up dropping out if they are not driven by the intrinsic motivation of learning. That is one reason why we created a similar program called D-School. So D-School comes from Ivan Illich's work on deschooling society, and D stands for decentralized schooling. And this is another talk, but I want to share like what do DAOs look like. So DAO is not very different from a company. You need engineering, you need product, treasury or finance, people, managers, community, PR and marketing, business development. So no matter what your skill or what your friend's skills are, you can have a participation in all of these different DAOs. So that is essentially why you can create a DAO. So you have DAOs just to manage funds. You are seeing DAOs who just collect NFTs like Pleaser DAO. You can have DAOs based on music, which are emerging right now. You can have DAOs based on development like Developer DAO. And this all was a very natural transition for us. So it's very important to implement and rapidly prototype these ideas. And that is why we need testnets. So the story of Rinkaby and other testnets in Ethereum is also very interesting, which we can go into. And I'll also point to the new testnet that just launched for all of us. It simulates what Ethereum would look like after the merge, like the big merge of EIP 1559. And I really like the name that they have used. Yeah, that's a great link, Akshita. Use Web3. So kintsugi is essentially this Japanese art of repairing broken pottery. And you can see that most of the things in Ethereum are very culturally driven that way. Like when you see that it's an octahedron, there's a reason for why that is. So we can go into all of that into why we need to have these cultural storytelling moments to inspire a whole bunch of people other than just people who are in it for the programming, who are in it for the Ethereum virtual machine, who want to understand the opcodes and so on. But you also need to understand like the story of how Ethereum and other organizations came to be and what their value systems are. So Ethereum, you can go into all these different ideas about how it came to be through like in lessons on kernel. And this is what we want to replicate somewhat on DAObi. So like all the things that Jennifer just described, we will have ERC20 contracts for the DAObi token that is minted daily. Now, there are two ways of minting any token. You can either have a fixed supply and pre-mine them, which you guys, I think, covered in the last lecture, pre-mining tokens. And then you have a way of having supplies and mint it on demand. And you have both these ways that you can do through existing calls. Let me share that particular code example from OpenZeppelin. Yeah. Yeah, I've successfully confused myself with so many tabs. So yeah, let's see, OpenZeppelin, non-fixed supply. Yeah, so that tells you how to create a contract. Yeah. Yeah, so if you want to create a fixed supply contract, you can essentially do that. And that is what most people used to do back in the ICO days. Like there was a very simple tool that people even used. I'll show you. So you can essentially use this thing called ZSLP or ZS Classic. You can create your own token by this graphical user interface and set up the token quantity, decimal places, and so on. And then just issue the token itself. And the token has a receiving address. So anyone who buys the token essentially buys it from you. And that is how like skeuomorphic things were back in 2017 when the ICOs were happening. So any token that you bought directly went into the wallet addresses of people who just created that. And yeah, thank you, Azad, for the question. So yeah, DSchool is an experiment I started at Kernel. So yeah, these are a lot of side projects. None of this is related to what I actually do for my full-time job, but this is something that the world is heading towards. So we have to like be there with the right values and the right tools to have impact in this world. So yeah, non-fixed supplies are very important because DAObi essentially is changing its minting rate daily. Like I offered a meme number of tokens, which Jennifer might have shown you. Like I'll just mint a meme number of tokens. So I'll just mint 42069 tokens on one day, or 69 tokens on the other day. And then someone, a very famous economist, I think Jennifer knows W. Diamond, Will Diamond. This guy is an assistant professor of finance at Wharton. He said he wants to replicate the Weimar Republic, so he'll mint a lot of tokens. And this is how you see that there are people from all these different angles coming in. And then you need balancers like Jennifer, who said, I'll control all those temptations and mint just one token for the next day. So you need to have the programmable medium to be able to do a non-fixed supply. And that's very straightforward to do.
Yeah,
essentially on
actually, I just saw on the Discord right now the sort of, wait a second, I'll just share. Can I share my screen 1 second? This is something that just happened just now, so I'm sharing. Yeah, you can see people right now are talking about, you know, we DAObi aristocrats need to start a faction and stick together to stop the incomers from devaluing our holdings. And I mean, we're at a stage where there aren't even incomers yet, and people are already scheming and trying to plot how to maintain the as yet non-existent wealth. So yeah, I think yeah, it seems to be working as intended. And if you want to get in now before all the aristocrats band together and start their cartel. Oh, you're muted, sorry.
People have been sharing things like, how do we represent tokens being melted into a cauldron? Like, how do you represent money being melted physically into a new form of physical matter? And how do we represent that in the crypto space? So that's essentially goes into how do we program things? How do we transform an ERC20 into an ERC 721 NFT. And that is where we keep getting into composable contracts and how do you wrap assets inside an NFT. Like whenever you buy an NFT, you put some amount of money into the contract itself. So the NFT itself is holding value instead of the NFT holder holding value. So there's all these concepts which we can play with. Like I'll share my screen again. There's a lot of fascinating stuff happening with things like ERC 998. It's complicated, so not many people have done that. It lets you do composable non-fungible tokens. And many people have been shying away from it because 721 was very powerful in itself. So essentially, it lets you design top-down composable contracts, keep tracks of child tokens for each of its tokens, and a bottom-up composable contracts, and keeps track of a parent token for each of its tokens. So for example, if you have 20 DAObi tokens, can you meld them into a cauldron, which holds the initial value that this cauldron was designed with the help of these 20 tokens. So to replicate all of that, we finally have very similar tools which let us do that by by implementing one of these interfaces. So yeah, if any one of you are interested, we can do this as a hacking session in the future. Like we can have like very extended sessions, but this talk was about establishing a lot of context about the metaverse. We haven't gotten into the metaverse yet, and that is something we can get into now if we have time, or later on. And like, how are we doing on time, Akshita?
Yeah, I think we are almost at the end of the 2 hours, so we can pick that up in another session. But this has been great. This has been so much information over the past 2 hours that I've really enjoyed it. I think I've learned a lot of new things today. I think we can open the floor for any questions if anybody else has anything.
Meanwhile, I'll get to my tip party.
We have a question in the chat. How do I get into DAObi? We have new incomers.
Asking the right question.
Yep. Okay.
Jennifer, do you want to cover that?
I can share it with everyone. So we put a link in the chat for the Discord. Let's go and break up the cartels.
Yes. Import ERC20 token. I'll just scan the contract address for Gitcoin. Yeah. Yeah, I'll be giving you some GTC.
Oh, sorry, I didn't realize I was muted. Okay, yeah, I've linked to the Discord and to the white paper, which is still being drafted. So the white paper is actually in Google Docs and it's open for comments. So yeah, please read and comment.
Yeah, so I'll distribute GTCs. How much should we do? Which is also straightforward. Okay, this is DAObi. This is now Anarchy. How many tokens do you want? I have 40 in my wallet. I can just have exactly 41.491, 42, right? So we won't hit 42, but let's try to do any meme number in the 30s. We can just take anything so that there's no gas issues. 37 or something from the Han Dynasty. Yeah, go ahead.
I said you chose a prime number.
Yeah, that would be my next 37 or something like that. But something from the Han Dynasty to signify the session, Jennifer.
Oh God, I don't know. I don't know what happened. What happened in the 30s BC? I can't think of anything very interesting. I don't know. 37. Let's do 37.
So
There's a comment in the chat.
Oh, let's see. How long? I'm being trolled. It's still happening. The Qin dynasty is still here. It just rebrands occasionally to remain relevant to modern consumers.
Things which will get you in trouble if you speak them publicly. Yeah, so this is the important step on tip.party. I'll distribute. See, oh, someone just joined in. Nice. right on time.
Rivals, yeah.
So yeah, if you have the screen open in front of you, I'll just confirm the contract, confirm the transaction, and transaction has been sent. So you will see some things happening on your screen very soon. And I'll drop the contract address as well. Nice. Each user
Awesome.
received 4.625 GTC.
Oh, that's very celebratory.
Yeah. Oh,
Yeah.
it's like on WeChat where you have the group red envelope, which is a feature I always wanted on other chats, and I don't even have it on WeChat anymore now that because I'm a foreigner. But yeah.
Yeah, so this is the GTC token address. If you want to add it to your MetaMask, if you want to see it, I'll just drop it in the chat. And yeah, this is on the Polygon mainnet. That's why it happened so quickly and did not cost much gas, but you can bridge it over to whatever network you want.
Got it. I'm curious about the tip party. Is this an open source tool?
Yeah, everything we do is open source. So p.party GitHub. Let me. Point is about designing these money Legos and different Legos which other people can use. Let me see what the repo link is. So if you want to join Moonshot Collective, if you want to join Gitcoin, just let me know. I'll like speed run your like involvement. Gitcoin, GitHub.
Yeah, how do we do that? How does one join Gitcoin and Moonshot Collect?
Link. Yeah, Gitcoin onboarding. Internet is just links upon links upon links. So I just shared a form for the onboarding form. If you need any help, just let me know. I mean, usually, yeah, the best onboarding tool right now is people. So you need to know the right people. We are still centralized that way. And these forms really help. But yeah, if you want to do anything quickly, you need to know people in all these communities. So this is one thing. Yeah, the GitHub repo, right? Moonshot, it must be on my GitHub. So all the code is open source in these two reports.
Okay, great. Sid, you've been around for a while, and I think we had a question before also on the chat about somebody who's just starting out with learning about blockchain and all. Do you have any other resources that you can share with everyone?
I mean, if my existing links were not enough, I'll just say that just stick to one particular thing. Like I shared speedrun Ethereum. If you're a person who learns by doing, like most programmers, you can just follow the quests, like individual quests on speedrun Ethereum, and follow that link that I shared about Nader and Austin Griffith, talking to each other about how to go about this. That should be the best programmatic introduction to blockchain. If you want to get interested in other aspects, like the society level aspect of culture and all of that, there are other ways to do that. But Kernel has an open source syllabus which you can go through. So it becomes very heady and philosophical if you're not that kind of a person. Like, how do you play with pattern and what does blockchain have to do with it? Like, what does quantum thought have to do with whatever we are doing here? And how do you have complementary opposites? How can you be right and wrong at the same time? So we have all those sorts of conversations, and that's a different level of abstraction if you are interested in things which are like these cultural histories that we have come from. So if you want to speed run the last 10 years of crypto, if you are not in crypto, I think this would really help you. And like, how does trust work? How does money work? If you are interested in these topics, this syllabus would help you. And the fellowship for this season, just like the cohort, we call them kernel blocks. So that entry just ended. So for block 6 onwards, if anyone needs any help getting in, just let me know. I'll send you a link to how to do that. You would find a lot of people putting kernel in the Twitter bios, and that essentially gives you like the shared context of this syllabus. Like we all have gone through like what does intention means and what does intention mean? How do you programmatically represent truth? So every lesson every week has a Web3 lesson and like a general philosophical lesson or a personal lesson. And it goes into all these specific topics, like what does it mean to have consensus? And honestly, if you found like where do I get this knack of sharing links, like kernel is loaded with all these links. So yeah, kernel is one way of going about all of these things. I think I shared a link to that. I'll share it again. And yeah, designing like better users for NFTs essentially. So one of my favorite projects from kernel is prison art, or like how do you free someone, like digital art which pays back prisoner debt. So prisoners who can do artwork, their NFTs are used to help them restore dignity after they leave prison. So they collect, digitize, and sell artwork made in prisons and solve a lot of problems in society and health. So this is a different way of expressing NFTs instead of just hodling one specific NFT which specifies access to a specific club. And this is what kernel is mostly about. How can you better use this new programmatic medium as you go forward? And the people there are amazing. Like Holly is one of the best people who like is an AI programmer, like a data scientist, a cultural expert, and she has been working on a lot of these kinds of things. So yeah, kernel really exposed me to a lot of such people. And yeah, if you're a curious person in general, you would really like it. And then if you want to go more focused, there is metagame, which has its own syllabus and its own DAO and all of that. So yeah, I mean, there's this, it's just overwhelming in the crypto space. So I would just say, if you're a programmer, just focus on one specific topic to start with, and speedrun Ethereum is the best way to programmatically approach it.
Got it. Kernel looks really fantastic, to be honest. I'm surprised I hadn't come across this before, but thank you for that.
Sure.
Okay. Does anyone else have any questions? Okay, we have one on the chat.
That's a very interesting question. How many projects do I need to have to secure a job? So yeah, the nature of job itself is changing, Anna. So yeah, you have to essentially just show up. Like there was this guy from a university in India who just showed up to a Twitter space in Padawan DAO, which is another community which is a beginner-friendly community. If you want to try that out, it sponsors like your tickets for conferences like ETH Denver and so on, and it's a very friendly place for beginners, as the name suggests. So there was a Twitter Spaces, and one guy just said, I want to learn about things. I happen to be in that same space, and just said, yeah, just come join me in Gitcoin. I have a task for you. You're creating this primer, and yeah, that's how you get started. So it's not about how many projects you have, but like just do one or two ways of showing your proof of work and proof of commitment. And I think some of you are already familiar with build space. So just do one project with that so that you have something to show for, and just show up. Like it's all about just showing up. We are so early that we have more hackathons than we have developers. We have more judges in hackathons than we have projects. It's a very like convoluted world in crypto right now.
Yeah, I read this article, I read this report somewhere that right now there are 35,000 new developers being added to Web3 space every month. But even then, I think there's a severe shortage of Web3.
Yeah, I mean, I think I have to drop off to another call. So
Yeah.
yeah, there's a big shortage, but we can reconnect in the Discord after that. So Jennifer, do you want to have any closing thoughts here?
Sorry, muted. Yeah, I don't think so. Yeah, just please join and take a look. And I guess, yeah, if you are looking for projects to work on, I've got a big one here. So please come and join DAObi and help code it, because I certainly can't do it. So yeah.
I have a list of all the links that Sid gave out today. So I'm going to compile that and set it out to this group after. And thanks so much, Jen and Sid, for coming and sharing all your knowledge with us. I think it was a great to us.
Yeah, thank you for inviting us. It's been really interesting.
Okay, guys, have a nice
First talk for DAObi. Like, this is the first public thing we did for DAObi.
Glad that it was here on this platform. Cheering on, we are going to be there in DAObi as incomers and hopefully make the first crypto powered society.
Yeah, let's go.
Let's start with the
To the moon or somewhere in the vicinity.
Yeah.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Okay,
Thanks.
bye.